Hi, this is Dave Heckroth, and you've joined another round of Zilker Tech Talk. Today we'll be talking about how to create and use static domains from ODM's Rule Designer. We're going to be talking about a number of things today. What is a domain? Why do I care about domains? We're going to start with a clean application, one that we've reviewed before, TLP application. We'll define a static domain. We'll reference a rule that uses that domain, and we'll notice a couple of things about it. So let's talk about what is a domain. And I'm sure it has many definitions, but with respect to IBM's ODM product, a domain is a restricted BOM element. That is, if you have an object model and that object model has an attribute in it, it is restrictions to that attribute. If that attribute is of type string, it might be a number of strings, right? Colors that it could be considered, red, blue, white, whatever the case may be. If it's a integer, it can be like age. It can be anything greater than 18 or from 18 to 65. Here we see all the different domain types for ODM. There are several of them, from literals to static references, bounded domains, collection domains, a dynamic domain, which we're going to be talking about in a separate tech talk, and then just clearly others. When we talk about static domains, we include all those things here that are not red. So for the most part, all of these are static with the exception of the dynamic domain. The dynamic domain, just as a clarifier, it's really something that bases its restrictions, right? Since we've talked about domain being restrictions to the BOM element values. Dynamic domains are when those values are externalized into a data file. So that's something that gets resolved at runtime rather than design time. So why should you care about domains? And really, domains are, because they're a way to restrict the value set for a given attribute, it's really a way to benefit the developer community, right? If a rule author is coming in to supply a value in a particular rule, by having a domain, it restricts those sets of values that they might acknowledge as part of that attribute. So instead of being able to put in any color, only 3 colors might be listed, red, white, or blue, and they can select from that possible list of 3. Now, the other advantage is that it is, other than as a quality control type measure, being able to select only those attribute values which are acknowledged for the attribute, it also reduces the list of possibilities. So maybe if an attribute is color, right, and you've got a domain which identifies red, white, and blue, then the rule author won't be tempted to put in green or black or orange. So it reduces the value set that they have to choose from, and it shows up in the editors of ODM, and that's a big advantage as well. And lastly, I make a couple of comments here about dynamic domains. We'll be addressing that in another tech talk, but it's really basing its values on a separate data file, and it allows it to be resolved at runtime. So we won't be chatting about that. We'll talk about that later. I'm going to use the application that I've used in several of my tech talks to provide reference for some of this information. It's the TLP application. It's a rating engine application, and it leverages several sub-decisions in order to make its ultimate goal decision of providing an insurance rating value. If you remember, one of the sub-decisions was financial stability, and that was financial stability score. Its restricted values or value set was poor, average, or excellent. And so let's walk through what it would take to create a static domain for that, and then we can use that in corresponding rules. At the very end, I'll be going through a demo, so you'll actually get an appreciation for what it is to do this in a somewhat live. But I'd like to share these slides with you just so that you have an appreciation if I don't stop and look at everything from a from a live perspective. So first thing we do is we really understand from an object model's perspective what class we're dealing with and what attribute within that class we're wanting to affect. And so here we're talking about the financial stability class and the attribute called financial stability. It's ultimately a score value, and again, the value set is poor, average, or excellent. Well, the first thing we do is we drop into the editor for that particular class and look at the members that are part of that. These are the attributes, and click on the one called financial stability. Here you'll see that editor come up, and we want to create a domain associated with that. So we click on the hyperlink called create. When we do that, we'll get a pop-up screen, and that pop-up screen literally is asking something about the domain, right? Is it a literal domain or is it some other domain which we can select? In our case, it's literal. We have those string values identified. We click on literal, then we go and we click on next. The next thing it asks for is what are the literal values? So what are those that we can enter? And again, we just click the add button and put poor, average, and excellent in as values, and then correspondingly we hit the finish button. After we do that, the static domain has been created for financial stability, and we can now reference a rule and verify that that static domain is available to the rule editing authoring environment. So if we go to one of the rules, in this case it's sample rule, and we go to the part of the rule where we're assigning that particular attribute, we set that value, and we hit the control spacebar, we're going to get our pop-up that says, here are the domain values. And this is what I was talking about when I said you could obviously set it to a number of different attributes or functions, but to the extent that those domain value set values have been identified, you can then go ahead and click on one of those, and it makes it much easier. You know you're going to get the right spelling, you're going to get the right the one of the potential correct values, makes it easier for authors. So now I'd like to walk you through the actual demo part of this. Here on the screen you can see that I've got the TLP rule set and I've got the corresponding BOM with that. And as we talked earlier, first thing to do is go into the BOM and update the attribute. And so I'll double click on one. I happen to know that this one relates to a series of bow rules which will make showing the transformation easier. So I'll go ahead and use that. We can see that it's property risk. We can see that we then just come down here and create the domain. After we create the domain, we select literal and next, and we can then add the individual entry. After I enter all the individual entries for the literals, I click finish, and when I do, you can see that the domain literals get displayed. So let's go ahead and save our work, and we're going to go ahead and go to a rule and actually see how this is influenced in the rule representation. So I'll bring up a rule here for us to use and investigate a little bit. Here we can see that this is a property risk rule, property risk 01. And here in the action portion of the rule, I do reference the property risk attribute, and we can see that it currently has a value. So if we wanted to come in and see how our change has influenced this, I'll just go ahead and delete the old value out. We know it's low, and I'm going to hit Control Space on my keyboard, and we can see that now I have options, right? And these options are denoted because of the static domain. And I can click any one of these. If I click low, which is what was there before, it clearly puts it out there. I can save my work, and there you see the advantage. A key thing here is, one, it restricts the values and it allows me to pick those that only make sense for this particular attribute assignment. So there you go. If you have any questions, feel free to email me